There's a mountain near my house that my family and I like to hike. It's a good workout if you keep a good pace, but it's also very doable with a preschooler in tow and a toddler in one of those hiking backpack things. And at the top, the view is spectacular, with wooded neighborhoods and rolling farms as far as the eye can see. The problem with this hike is that there are a few intersections of trails that, if you're not careful, can have you circling the base of the mountain for miles. I remember one such hike, we had already made it to the top, and we were making our way back down when we came to a critical intersection. Looking at the map, it was impossible to tell which trail we were actually on. If we were on the blue trail, we were headed in the right direction, and we'd soon be at the parking lot and headed out for some well-deserved ice cream. But if we were on the yellow trail, well, we needed to take a critical turn and get back on the blue trail. Thankfully, my husband is fantastic with directions. But for whatever reason, I was almost certain I knew which way we should go, and it wasn't the way Mike thought we should go. After some friendly debate, with each of us making our case, I finally decided to trust Mike's sense of direction, and we ended up avoiding the extra 4 miles of trails. Even when the stakes are relatively low, daring to trust isn't always easy, which is why we're taking the month of September to discover what it means to trust. We define trust like this: putting your confidence in someone you can depend on. There's a phrase we say around here often: I can trust God no matter what. And it's true. We know that God is someone we can depend on, and we want our kids to know that too. That's why we've chosen Proverbs 3:5 as our memory verse. It says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not depend on your own understanding." Our own understanding can have a way of getting us in trouble sometimes, especially when life doesn't turn out exactly how we'd want or expect. That's why it's important that our trust is grounded in God, His love for us, and His willingness to do whatever it takes to have a relationship with us. If we don't trust, we might miss the opportunity to watch God show up and do what only He can do. We start the month with Jacob. After swindling his brother's birthright and blessing right out from under him, he's on the run. He stops for the night to rest and has an incredible dream. God renewed the covenant He started with Jacob's grandfather, Abraham. All nations would be blessed from Jacob's family. So kids will focus on one of our basic truths: you can trust God no matter what. For the rest of the month, we looked through scripture to find the best stories to help kids unpack this idea of trust, and we kept coming back to Jacob's son, Joseph. Joseph found himself in some crazy situations throughout his life. Yet, time and again, scripture tells us that Joseph trusted God and found hope in Him. So each week for the rest of this month, we'll take a close look at Joseph's life and discover something about how we can trust God and the people He's put in our lives. In week 2, we discover Joseph's backstory. He's his father Jacob's favorite son. Jacob makes this fact crystal clear when he offers Joseph a beautiful, ornate robe. His brothers are completely jealous, a jealousy that's only fueled by Joseph's dreams that have them bowing down to him. They decide to take care of him and sell him to a band of traders headed to Egypt. And they cover up their actions by lying to Jacob and telling him Joseph had been killed. Joseph was now headed off as a slave in Egypt and must have felt completely alone. There are times when we feel the same way, that life has handed us a bad situation and there's not a single person we can trust in the entire world. But we want our kids to remember that even when we think we're alone, we can trust that God is with us. In week 3, we learned that God blessed Joseph, and even though Joseph was a slave, he was put in charge of Potiphar's house. But while he was there, he was accused of something he didn't do, and he found himself in prison. And while he was in prison, God helped him interpret a couple of dreams that came true. He thought this was his chance to get out of jail, but instead, Joseph was forgotten and stayed in prison for several more years. Joseph must have been confused at what God was doing. He had done nothing wrong, and yet he was stuck in prison with hardly any hope of getting out. Yet we see that even though life didn't make sense, Joseph trusted that God was with him. We pray that kids will realize the same thing about God in their own life. The following week, we see that Joseph had finally gotten a chance to get out of jail. Pharaoh had a dream that no one could interpret, and it's in this moment that the king's cupbearer, who was in prison with Joseph, remembered how Joseph had interpreted his dream. At once, Pharaoh sent for Joseph. He went and with God's help interpreted the dreams and offered a plan for helping Egypt survive the famine that God said was coming. Pharaoh put Joseph in charge of the entire kingdom. God had seen Joseph through the most difficult times, and now God's plan for Joseph's life was starting to come into focus. The pressure was on for Joseph to succeed, but now, more than ever, he knew that God was with him. Our kids will face moments when they feel like the pressure is on, and we hope that through this story, they see that God is with them and can help them through whatever happens. In week 5, we finished Joseph's story with what happened when his brothers came in search of food. The famine had spread far and wide, and Joseph's brothers made the trek down to Egypt, and sure enough, they ended up right in front of Joseph. After some back and forth over several weeks, Joseph couldn't stand it any longer. He revealed himself to his brothers and offered them forgiveness for everything that had happened. At this point in the story, Joseph shared what is perhaps the most important lesson this month. His brothers had meant selling him for harm, but God had a bigger plan. God used this situation for a greater purpose, to help their family, God's people, survive through the famine. When we try and see our problems through God's eyes, we can trust that God has something bigger planned for our lives. We want kids to know beyond a shadow of a doubt that they can trust God no matter what. This month, let's offer them a solid foundation they can trust. The God of the universe and people like you who want nothing but what's best for their lives.